He said I was the only one who truly understood him. I remember how gently he said it, his hand tracing slow circles on my knee, his voice low like a secret. I wanted to believe him. Of course I did. Everyone wants to think they're the one person who sees behind the curtain. But the night I found his messages, those same words sent to 3 other women, something inside me stopped. It wasn't heartbreak, not yet. It was disbelief so sharp it felt like a laugh caught in my throat. Because love, I realized, doesn't just lie. Sometimes it copies and pastes. The discovery didn't come with fireworks or confrontation. It happened on a Tuesday, the most ordinary kind of day. He'd left his laptop open on the coffee table, a half-empty mug beside it, his scent still floating in the room, that faint mix of cedarwood and coffee grounds. I wasn't looking for anything. I was reaching for my charger when the screen lit up. Notifications blinked across the top. Names I didn't recognize, fragments of sentences too familiar to ignore. My stomach tightened before I even clicked. One message preview was still visible, the text bold, unread. "You're the only one who gets me." The timestamp read 1:13 a.m. My pulse spiked. That phrase, that exact phrase, had been mine once. I'd heard it whispered against my neck, murmured in dark rooms, typed between goodnight emojis. And now it lived somewhere else, belonging to someone else. I clicked. The conversation unfolded like a scene I'd already lived through. The same rhythm, the same jokes, even the same punctuation. A carefully placed ellipsis that made his messages sound intimate, thoughtful. There were 3 threads, 3 women, 3 versions of the same script, different names, same words. "You're special. I don't open up like this to anyone. You understand me better than anyone ever has." It was almost poetic, in a sick way, how precise his repetition was. My first instinct wasn't rage, it was confusion. The kind that makes your ears ring, that leaves you standing still in the middle of your own home, holding a truth that doesn't fit in your hands. I scrolled slowly, rereading lines I'd once thought were ours. Every word looked smaller now, deflated, like a balloon that had lost its air. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's TV flickered with the muted hum of a sitcom audience laughing at something I couldn't hear. Inside, it was just me, the glow of the laptop screen and the low hum of Betrayal. When I finally looked up from the screen, the room felt different. The shadows stretched longer. The clock on the wall ticked louder. Even the air tasted metallic. I shut the laptop and sat back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling stared back, blank and harmless, as if nothing monumental had happened beneath it. It's strange how quiet betrayal is. It doesn't crash through the door. It seeps through the cracks, settles in your bones, waits for you to notice. I sat there for a long time, hands clasped in my lap, heartbeat too slow for the chaos in my head. I could hear his words echoing, the only one who truly understood me, over and over, until they started to sound like static. And beneath that noise, another thought began to form, small, cold, clear. He didn't just lie, he recycled. After I shut the laptop, I just sat there in the dark, the screen's afterglow still flickering faintly in my eyes. The apartment hummed with the soft noises of a normal evening, the refrigerator kicking on, pipes sighing somewhere in the walls. But everything sounded warped, like background noise to a scene I no longer belonged in. I could still see his words burned into the inside of my eyelids. "You're the only one who gets me." The sentence looped in my head, its rhythm all wrong now, too hollow, too deliberate. I pressed my fingers to my temples, as if I could rub the memory away, but it stayed, bright and sharp as glass. The couch beneath me felt foreign. The air in the room was heavy, with something chemical and metallic, like burned sugar. I thought about the way he always called me his piece. How many women had he said that to? Did they all feel as stupidly safe as I once did? I stood up slowly, unsure what to do with my body. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me to the window. Outside, the city pulsed, people crossing streets, headlights gliding like veins of light through the dark. Somewhere down there, someone was falling in love. Someone else was realizing it was over, and I was caught somewhere in between, a heartbeat still trying to decide which side it belonged to. He texted an hour later. Just a photo of a sunset he must have taken earlier. No caption. The timing was cruel. That's the thing about men like him. Their betrayals aren't always loud. They're disguised as tenderness, wrapped in normal moments, slipped quietly between gestures that used to mean love. I didn't reply. Instead, I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked steady, but my hands were trembling, tiny tremors I couldn't hide. I'd always prided myself on being intuitive, on reading people. How had I missed this? The question sat in my chest like a brick. Maybe I didn't miss it. Maybe I just didn't want to believe it. The thought made my throat ache. I turned on the tap, splashed cold water on my face, and watched droplets cling to my chin before sliding down, disappearing one by one. I remembered the first time he told me I understood him, how it made me feel chosen. Seen. That's the trick, isn't it? They make you think you're chosen so you won't notice you're replaceable. I walked back to the living room, turned on a lamp, and the soft yellow light made everything look too calm. His book lay open on the coffee table, spine cracked, a folded page marking the spot where he'd stopped reading. I stared at it like it was proof of something, maybe that his world kept spinning while mine had stalled. The smell of his cologne lingered faintly on the throw blanket draped over the couch. I pulled it closer, then immediately pushed it away, disgusted by how automatic the gesture was. My body still wanted comfort from the same source that had poisoned it. I sat there for a while, blanket on the floor, heart heavy but oddly clear. When my phone buzzed again, I didn't need to look to know it was him. "You awake?" The message glowed up at me from the screen, innocent in its simplicity. I typed 3 words, "Not anymore, Mark," then deleted them before sending. Silence was louder. I turned the phone face down, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly, slicing the light into soft flickers. My breathing matched its rhythm, shallow and even. Somewhere between each rotation, I understood that this strange stillness was the first step of detachment. The first time I saw him clearly, not as the man I loved, but as a collector of attention. He didn't want connection, he wanted reflection. A mirror in every woman who looked at him and saw something he'd curated. And for a while, I'd been proud to be his favorite mirror. The realization didn't make me cry. It didn't even make me angry. It made me tired. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from finally running out of illusions. I got up, turned off the light, and let the room fall back into darkness. In the silence, his words echoed one last time, "You're the only one who gets me." But now, I heard the truth beneath them. It wasn't that I was the only one. It was that I was the only one who still believed him. Before the messages, before the mirrors, there was peace, or at least what I thought was peace. Mark had a way of moving through a room like it already belonged to him, calm and deliberate, always knowing exactly where to stand, so the light hit him just right. I used to find that magnetic. He'd talk, and people would lean in. I leaned in too. From the beginning, he spoke in confessions. Not deep ones, but just intimate enough to feel special. "I don't usually open up like this," he'd said the night we met, his voice low, the city noise spilling through the cafe windows behind him. I remember thinking, he trusts me already. That was his gift. He didn't seduce you with compliments. He seduced you with vulnerability, or at least what looked like it. He told me about the books that changed him, the music he listened to when he couldn't sleep, his childhood dog that died too young. Nothing extraordinary, but he delivered it like scripture. He made me feel like I'd been given exclusive access to his private world. And once you feel chosen, you stop checking the fine print. In the early months, everything was tender and deliberate. Late night walks after dinner. His jacket draped over my shoulders when I forgot mine. The way he'd text me in the middle of a meeting just to say, "Thinking about you. You're my calm place." I'd blush at my desk, rereading it until my coworkers teased me. It wasn't dramatic love. It was steady, domestic, the kind you build your evenings around, the kind that makes you believe you're safe. He had this way of studying me when I spoke, head tilted slightly, eyes narrowed like he was storing every word. It made me feel seen, and being seen is intoxicating when you've spent years being half noticed. Once, during one of our first nights together, he reached for my hand and said, "You don't have to explain yourself to me. I just get you." I laughed softly, surprised by how much that sentence disarmed me. It was simple, but it wrapped around my ribs like a promise. Our life fell into a rhythm that looked like stability. Morning coffee together, playlists shared over text, him picking me up after work just to make sure I got home safe. He made ordinary moments feel cinematic, small touches, half smiles, quiet laughter that made the world look filtered and warm. I kept thinking, this is what real love feels like. Gentle, consistent, kind. I didn't realize consistency can also be a strategy, that gentleness can be a mask. He was charming in that soft, intellectual way, the kind of charm that doesn't demand attention, but still fills the room. Friends called him thoughtful. My mother said he seemed emotionally mature. Even the waiter at our favorite place once told us, "You two are so in sync." I remember that line vividly, because Mark smiled like he knew something the rest of us didn't. Looking back, I think that was when he started building the mythology of us. The long, rambling conversations about how we were different from everyone else, how we saw the world deeper, clearer. He'd say, "People don't understand me, but you do." And I'd believe him every time. I thought it was intimacy. Now I see it for what it was, groundwork. He was building trust the way some people build escape routes, quietly, efficiently, with an exit in every direction. But then, it felt beautiful. He made me believe that connection could be rare and simple at the same time. We'd spend Sundays on the couch, books in our laps, his leg pressed against mine, that comfortable silence people talk about in poems. He'd look up, catch me watching him, and smile like it meant something profound. "You feel like home," he said once without even looking up from his page. And that's the thing about men like him. They always say the right things, not because they mean them, but because they've learned the effect they have. I didn't know it yet, but those lines were rehearsed. I was one of many audiences, each convinced we were the only ones in the theater. If you'd asked me then what trust felt like, I would have said it was his voice. Low, steady, certain. The way he'd say my name when he wanted to calm me down, or the way his thumb would trace circles on my palm when I was anxious. I didn't know trust can also feel like hypnosis. Now when I look back on those months, they play in my mind like a film shot in warm tones, too perfect, too edited. Every frame glows, but if you pause it long enough, you can see the cracks at the edges. Because peace built on illusion always hums with a low, invisible tension. And deep down, some part of me must have known. There's a certain kind of love that doesn't feel like falling. It feels like being led. That's what it was with Mark. He never pushed. He guided. He made everything seem effortless, inevitable, like trust was the natural next step. I used to tell my friends that being with him was like finally taking a deep breath. After years of holding it in, they'd smile, tell me I'd found someone emotionally intelligent. I believed that. I believed him. He knew exactly how to make belief feel safe. If I asked a question, even a harmless one, he'd laugh softly, touch my hand and say, "You think too much." Then he'd change the subject, tell a story, say something disarming, and before I realized it, my doubt had been replaced by gratitude for his patience. It wasn't manipulation that looked like control. It was manipulation that looked like love. Mark had this habit of confessing small, forgivable flaws. He'd talk about how bad he was at texting back, how people sometimes misread his friendliness, how he'd been too trusting in past relationships. Those tiny admissions built credibility. I thought, if he's being this honest about the small things, he'd never lie about the big ones. I didn't realize those confessions were bait, the kind that makes you lower your guard just enough to let the real deceit slip through unnoticed. He made vulnerability sound like poetry. Once, we sat on the floor of our living room at 2 a.m, eating cold leftovers and talking about the kind of people we used to be. He said, "You're the only person who's ever seen me like this. I don't even recognize myself with anyone else." His eyes were soft, voice steady, and I remember feeling something bloom in my chest. Not love, exactly, but a deep kind of pride. As if being his mirror gave my existence new meaning. That line, "You're the only one who gets me," had a rhythm that felt rehearsed, but I didn't hear it then. I just heard devotion. When someone looks at you like you're the answer to all their questions, you stop asking your own. He made it seem like intimacy was a reward I had earned by being different. Not prettier, not smarter, just more understanding. That word carried power in our relationship. Understanding. He used it the way other people use forever. He'd say, "You understand me," when I forgave him for forgetting plans, or when I stayed calm after he disappeared for a few hours with no explanation. I thought it was a compliment. It was really conditioning. Looking back, I can see how carefully he built it, a version of love where trust meant silence and doubt meant betrayal. Every time I tried to name what felt off, he'd tilt his head with that soft, pitying smile and say, "You're projecting." I started to believe him. That's what gaslighting does. It erodes you gently. It doesn't scream you're wrong. It whispers you're overreacting. The truth is, I didn't ignore the red flags. I rationalized them, the long pauses before he answered texts, the way his phone tilted just out of view, the stories that didn't match the timestamps. Every time my instinct flared, I buried it under excuses. He's busy. He's tired. He's trying. I didn't want to see deceit because I'd invested too much in the illusion of stability. It's easier to fix a story than to rewrite your life. There was one night, I think about it now more than I'd like to admit. He came home late, the air around him colder than usual. I asked where he'd been. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "You know me. Just needed a walk." His tone was warm, convincing, casual. I nodded, even though my chest felt hollow. Later, while he showered, I noticed the faint scent of perfume on his collar. It wasn't mine. I told myself I was imagining it. I crawled into bed and let the sound of running water drown out my intuition. He had this talent for making me grateful just to be chosen. That's what I hate most in hindsight, how small I let myself become to fit into his version of love. I used to write him notes, little reminders I'd slip into his bag. "You're doing great. You've got this. I'm proud of you." I never realized I was cheering for a man who was performing sincerity for multiple audiences. And yet, I loved him, fully, blindly, faithfully, because believing him wasn't about trusting him. It was about trusting the version of myself that felt safe with him. It's terrifying to admit that your comfort was built on someone else's script, but I see it now. He didn't lie because he was cruel. He lied because he needed to keep the world orbiting around him. He once told me, "You make me feel understood." I used to think that was the highest form of love. Now I know better. Real love isn't about being understood. It's about being honest, even when the truth makes you unlikable. And Mark only knew how to be loved for the versions of himself he invented. It started with the pauses, the kind of quiet that doesn't sound like comfort anymore. The first time I noticed it, we were having dinner at home. The candlelight flickered against his face, softening everything except his eyes. I was telling him about my day, a new project at work, a colleague who wouldn't stop interrupting me, and he nodded, smiled, even threw in the occasional, "Mm-hmm." But halfway through, I realized his gaze wasn't on me. It was on his phone, face down beside his plate, vibrating every few minutes like a heartbeat he was trying to ignore. He apologized for being distracted, said something about a deadline, and I smiled because that's what I always did, gave him the benefit of the doubt before doubt even had a chance to speak. But that night, when he went to take a call, I noticed the way he turned his body slightly toward the wall, lowering his voice just enough that I couldn't make out the words. When he came back, he kissed the top of my head like punctuation, sealing off the moment before it could become a question. After that, the rhythm of us started changing. Our late-night talks, the ones that used to stretch until dawn, grew shorter, thinner. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped sharing his. I'd catch him staring at his screen, half smiling at something, and when I asked, he'd lock it and look up like he'd been pulled from another world. "Just work stuff," he'd say, tone flat, eyes too calm. He'd always been good at calm. I think that's why I didn't see it sooner. Calm is easy to mistake for honesty. One Sunday morning, I woke to find him sitting at the edge of the bed, scrolling. Sunlight poured through the blinds, striping the room with gold and shadow. He was smiling just slightly, that soft, private smile that used to be mine. When I stirred, he looked over his shoulder, startled. "Hey," he said, too cheerful, "go back to sleep." Then he slipped his phone under the pillow. I lay there, pretending to drift off, feeling the space between us expand by the inch. The next few weeks blurred into a pattern of small absences. He'd stay up late after I went to bed. He'd take his calls outside, standing by the balcony door with his voice low and steady. When I joined him once, he hung up mid-sentence and said, "Bad reception." The lie was so small it barely registered, but it was the kind that leaves residue. I started noticing echoes in his words. He'd tell me something and then repeat it, almost word for word, days later, as if he was trying it out on different audiences. Once, he called me Love, a nickname he rarely used, and for a split second, I could tell it wasn't meant for me. The tone was off, the rhythm wrong. He caught himself immediately, covered it with a smile, and I pretended not to notice. Pretending had become muscle memory. He began posting less about us. The photos that used to flood his social media, our trips, our dinners, our inside jokes, disappeared. When I asked why, he said he wanted to keep his private life private. That sounded reasonable. I agreed. But that night, when I couldn't sleep, I checked his account again. He hadn't stopped posting. He just stopped posting me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that love requires trust, not surveillance. But then came the moment I couldn't shake. A text, meant for someone else. Just a single emoji, a heart, sent at 2 a.m. When I asked who it was for, he said it was a friend from college, going through a hard time. I believed him. Or at least, I pretended to. It's easier to swallow a lie when the alternative tastes like betrayal. Still, my body knew before my mind did. My chest tightened whenever he reached for his phone. My stomach flipped at every notification sound. I started measuring the silence between his replies like they were clues. He once told me I overthink everything, that it's my defense mechanism. Maybe he was right. But overthinking is just intuition in disguise, and mine was already screaming. One night I woke up to find him asleep beside me, his phone still glowing faintly on the nightstand. I turned it face down without looking, not because I didn't want to know, but because I already did. And still, I couldn't bring myself to break the spell. Not yet. That's the cruelest thing about doubt. It doesn't come all at once. It arrives in increments. A tone, a glance, a silence, too long to be harmless. And by the time you're ready to face it, the truth is already halfway through the door. I didn't know it then, but those tiny cracks, the missed eye contact, the sudden privacy, the way he said love like it belonged elsewhere, were already letting the light in. And soon, it would flood everything. Suspicion doesn't start with proof. It starts with patterns, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. His phone became a metronome in our house, lighting up every few minutes, always face down, always followed by that soft flick of his thumb as he cleared the notification before I could glance over. I told myself I trusted him, because saying it out loud kept the panic quieter, but my body wasn't fooled. My hands stayed cold even in the warmth of our bed. He started working later, claiming he needed focus time. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd never seen him focused on anything but himself. I'd hear the front door close around 10, the same smooth voice through the crack in the window. "No, she's asleep." At first, I convinced myself he was talking to a client, but the tone, that soft, Smiling tone people, save for late-night confessions, gave him away. One night, when he left his laptop charging in the living room, I sat there staring at it for what felt like an hour. My reflection hovered faintly on the black screen, ghost-like, distorted. I wasn't the kind of person who snooped. At least that's what I used to tell myself. But the truth is, when love becomes uneven, curiosity turns into survival. I touched the trackpad. The screen lit up. His wallpaper was a photo I'd taken, us on the balcony, sunlight hitting his face. For a second, that image almost stopped me. Then the email icon blinked in the corner. I didn't open it right away. I just watched the cursor hover. And then, like some cruel reflex, I clicked. The inbox unfolded, neat and organized, folders labeled work, travel, personal. My stomach turned when I saw another folder buried beneath them, Muse. Inside were messages, dozens of them, words that felt too familiar to belong to anyone else. Soft affirmations, poetic fragments, photos of sunsets, black and white quotes about love and understanding. Each one addressed to a different woman, different names, same rhythm. You have no idea how rare it is to be seen like this. You're the only one who calms my mind. You're my mirror. I stopped breathing, somewhere between the second and third thread. My pulse buzzed in my ears. Every line I read was an echo of something he'd once said to me, word for word. He hadn't just lied. He'd replicated. Like a copy-paste artist, weaving the same intimacy over and over until it was impossible to tell who'd heard it first. There's something humiliating about realizing you weren't special, just efficient. I scrolled further, each click another small betrayal, a song link he'd once sent me as our song, a photo of the same meal he'd told me he'd cooked alone, a compliment typed and retold like a script he'd memorized. I could almost see him smiling as he wrote them, that soft, practiced half-smile that once made me feel chosen. I closed the laptop gently, like I was tucking in the corpse of something I'd loved. The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m. Outside, the street was empty, one car passing, tires whispering against wet asphalt. I sat there in the glow of the lamp, staring at my own hands. They were steady. Too steady. That's when I realized anger hadn't arrived yet. It was still waiting at the door, polite enough to knock. He came home a little after 3, smelling like rain and someone else's perfume. Faint, floral, almost sweet. He kicked off his shoes, humming softly, probably replaying whatever lie he planned to tell. I stayed seated on the couch, watching him from the shadowed corner of the room. When he noticed me, he flinched. "You scared me," he said, hand pressed to his chest, laughing it off. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, really looked. The way he avoided my eyes, the small twitch in his jaw, the ease that slipped a little too fast into defensiveness. He started to speak again, but I interrupted. "Rough night?" He froze. "What?" "Deadlines," I said. "You've been working late a lot." My tone was calm, almost gentle. His shoulders eased slightly, reassured by my quiet. "Yeah," he said, smiling weakly. "Just work." I nodded, pretending to accept it, but something in me shifted. The version of him I'd loved, that composed, articulate, magnetic man, began to dissolve right in front of me. What was left looked smaller, shakier, more human than I'd ever seen. When he went to shower, I sat there in the half-dark, listening to the water hit the tiles. The steam fogged the mirror above the sink, softening everything it touched. I thought about the messages, the folders, the women who probably thought they were his only one. Maybe they were sitting somewhere too, staring at their own reflections, wondering what made them so easy to duplicate. By the time he came out, wrapped in a towel, humming again, I'd already decided I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. Not until I could do it on my terms. I wanted him to think I was still asleep to his script. Because if he could play a role so perfectly, I could learn to do the same. I smiled when he kissed my cheek. He said, "You're quiet tonight." I met his eyes, steady, unreadable. "Just tired," I said. And that was the first lie I'd ever told him. The night I finally decided to confront him, the air itself felt heavy, electric, that kind of stillness before a thunderstorm when even silence buzzes. I'd spent the day pretending, smiling through breakfast, nodding through his small talk, kissing his cheek on my way out the door. My reflection in the elevator mirror didn't look like me, too calm, too composed. But under that calm, I could feel the pulse of truth, steady and sharp. By the time evening came, I was ready. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, sleeves rolled up, dinner half prepped, music low. To anyone else, it would have looked like a scene from a peaceful relationship, but I could already see the cracks. His phone propped up beside the cutting board, lighting up every few minutes with messages he pretended not to see. The rhythm of it made me sick. "Long day?" he asked, glancing up with that soft, practiced smile, the one that used to melt me. Now it looked like armor. "Exhausting," I said. My voice didn't tremble, though my fingers itched to grab the phone off the counter. I set my bag down, slow and deliberate. The smell of garlic and olive oil hung in the air, too warm for what was coming. He poured wine into 2 glasses, passed one to me, and leaned against the counter like a man completely unaware of the storm about to hit. "You okay?" he asked. "You've been quiet lately." "Just tired," I replied, the same lie I'd been using for weeks. I took a sip, felt the bitterness hit my tongue, and let it sit there for a beat too long. "Actually," I added, setting the glass down, "I wanted to ask you something." His eyes flickered, a quick flash of alertness behind the calm. "Sure," he said. "Who's Lily?" The name dropped into the air like a stone. The sound of it seemed to echo off the walls. He blinked, confusion crossing his face, too fast to be real. "What?" I took a slow breath. "Lily, or Ava, or maybe Rachel. Hard to keep track. They all seem to understand you so well." He laughed, the kind of hollow, nervous laugh that makes everything worse. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer right away. I just reached into my bag, pulled out his old tablet, the one he'd forgotten I still had the password for, and placed it on the counter between us. The screen was already unlocked. Messages glowed across it like neon confessions. 3 different conversations, side by side. 3 different women. And the same sentence repeated in each. "You're the only one who truly gets me." He stared at the screen. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words, just the slow collapse of a man caught in his own echo chamber. "I guess we should celebrate," I said softly, almost kindly. "Turns out you're very consistent." His composure cracked then. Just a flicker, but enough. "It's not what you think," he began, voice low, strained. "It's complicated." "It's not complicated," I said, cutting him off. "It's copy-paste." He froze. The faint clink of glass from the counter filled the silence. "You said the same things to them, Mark," I continued, voice steady, word for word. "I checked the timestamps. Sometimes you sent them while you were sitting right next to me." I picked up my wine again, took another sip, and met his eyes. "Tell me, did you ever forget which one of us you were talking to?" He stepped forward, palms out, pleading now. "Please, just let me explain." "No," I said. "You've already done enough explaining. You just did it to the wrong audience." He looked at me like I was the stranger now, like I'd changed languages mid-conversation. Maybe I had. Maybe the only language he spoke was deceit, and I'd finally stopped translating. "You don't understand," he said again, voice cracking. I was lost. I needed connection. "Then, why did you have to borrow the same words for everyone?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. He just stood there, chest rising and falling, the illusion finally stripped away. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as the charming, complicated man who needed saving, but as a collector of attention, a curator of affection. His sincerity wasn't real. It was recycled. I slid the tablet across the counter toward him. The screen dimmed, reflecting his face back at him. "You said I was the only one who truly understood you," I said. "You were right about one thing. I understand you perfectly now." He swallowed hard, voice barely above a whisper. "You're leaving?" I tilted my head, almost smiling. "No, Mark. You're already gone. You just didn't notice when." The silence that followed was total. No music, no words, no pretending. Just two people standing in the ruins of a story one of them had been rewriting in secret. He reached for the wine glass, but his hands were shaking. I picked up my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked to the door. When my hand touched the knob, I looked back once, not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted to remember the moment he finally looked small. "You were never hard to understand," I said. "You were just good at pretending." Then I left him standing there, surrounded by his reflections, with no one left to perform for. Morning came with that gray, indifferent light that makes everything look exposed. I woke on the couch at Claire's place, the blanket twisted around my legs, my throat dry from too many unspoken words. The city outside was already alive, cars starting, voices echoing down the street. But inside it was still. Too still. My body ached like I'd run for miles, though all I'd done was walk out a door I should have closed months ago. The night before replayed in fragments, the smell of garlic, his voice cracking, the look on his face when the screen went dark. I'd left before he could follow, before he could twist the story into something survivable for himself. That's the thing about men like him. They never lose control. They just rewrite the narrative. But not this time. Last night, I hadn't given him that chance. I'd taken the script back. Claire was still asleep in her room, her door cracked just enough to let the sound of her steady breathing slip through. I sat up slowly, pulled the blanket around my shoulders, and stared out the window. A thin layer of frost glazed the glass, blurring the edges of the world. It suited me, that hazy in-between space where everything was quieter but not yet peaceful. I checked my phone, 5 missed calls, 2 voicemails, all from him. I didn't listen. I didn't delete them either. They could wait, like ghosts lined up politely at the edge of my new beginning. The latest text sat at the top of the screen. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I almost laughed. The phrasing was so Mark. Clean, calculated, perfectly worded to sound remorseful without admitting anything. I locked the phone and set it face down. It looked smaller than usual. So did the lie. I made coffee in Claire's tiny kitchen, the machine sputtering and sighing, the smell filling the air with something warm enough to stand in. My reflection in the window looked unfamiliar. Barefaced, tired, but grounded. I thought about how he'd told me once that I looked soft in the morning light. That word used to sound like affection. Now it just sounded like a warning. Soft enough to mold, soft enough to break. The truth sat in me like a heavy stone, but not a sharp one anymore. It wasn't slicing, it was settling. For the first time, the weight didn't feel unbearable. It felt real, tangible, something I could build around. Around noon, Claire padded into the kitchen, hair messy, eyes still half closed. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You look lighter," she said. I smiled faintly. That's the exhaustion. She didn't press. She just poured herself coffee and sat across from me, her quiet presence, the only kind of comfort I needed. We didn't talk about him. There wasn't anything left to analyze. Some stories end so completely they don't even echo. By afternoon, I went back to the apartment, not to see him, but to gather the rest of my things. The air inside felt stale, thick, with something invisible and used. His shoes were by the door, exactly where they always were. The tablet was gone, probably buried or broken. I didn't care. The proof didn't matter anymore. Knowing was enough. He wasn't there. I was grateful for that. The silence belonged to me now. I walked through the rooms slowly, methodically, collecting pieces of myself. A sweater draped over a chair, a half-read book, my favorite mug. On the counter, a note in his handwriting waited. "I'm sorry. Please talk to me." The paper smelled faintly like his cologne, that same sharp citrus that once made me feel safe. I folded the note once, twice, then dropped it in the trash. The sound it made was soft but final. As I zipped my suitcase, I caught sight of a photo still stuck to the fridge, the two of us at the lake, sunburned and smiling, eyes squinting against the light. For a moment, I studied it. We looked happy, but happiness isn't evidence. It's editing. I peeled the photo off the magnet and placed it face down on the counter. When I left the apartment, I didn't look back. The hallway light flickered once as I walked through, and for a second, I thought about how many times I'd walked that same stretch of floor carrying groceries, laughter, plans. Now I carried nothing but air. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. The wind tugged at my coat, and the world felt wider than it had in a long time. Cars rushed by. People hurried past me, and none of them knew that my life had just quietly shifted. I walked until the building disappeared behind me, until his memory shrank small enough to fit into the noise of the city. When I reached the corner, I stopped and looked up at the sky. Gray, endless, empty, but not oppressive, just open. And for the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for his message. I wasn't waiting for his voice to fill the silence. I wasn't waiting at all. The first week without him was a strange kind of quiet, not peaceful yet, but functional, the kind of silence that hums in the background while you relearn how to move through your own space. I stayed at Claire's a few more days, helping her water her plants, cooking meals that didn't taste like anything, trying to get used to the idea that my phone no longer dictated my pulse. Every morning, sunlight would spill across the small kitchen table, landing on my coffee cup, and for a few seconds, I'd forget. Then the remembering would return, not painful, just there, like a bruise fading under skin. I started walking again. Long, pointless walks through the city with no destination, hands shoved deep in my coat pockets, breath fogging the air. I'd watch people moving around me, couples laughing, friends arguing, strangers scrolling, and it struck me how steady the world stayed while my own had cracked open. That realization was grounding in a strange way. The universe didn't pause for my heartbreak. It just kept spinning, daring me to catch up. At night, I'd lie awake scrolling through playlists, deleting the ones we'd made together. There were so many. Our mornings, road trip, just us. I played each one once before removing it, not as punishment, but as a kind of ritual. Each deletion felt like unclenching a fist I didn't know I'd been holding. The songs that survived were mine. Quieter, slower, but real. When Mark finally stopped calling, I thought I'd feel relieved. Instead, it was something subtler, the absence of a constant buzz. My days stretched open like a room I could finally walk across without tripping over his shadow. There's a discipline in not responding, a kind of strength that feels quiet but absolute. One afternoon, I went to the apartment to drop off my key. I didn't knock. I just slipped it through the mail slot, the metal clinking softly against the floor. A clean sound. I stood there for a moment, hand still on the door, and whispered, "That's yours now." I didn't mean the key. I meant the mess. After that, I stopped checking my phone for apologies. There's something addictive about waiting, about keeping the wound open just to see if the person who caused it will notice. But waiting is just another way of staying. So I stopped. I muted his number, archived our messages, and for good measure, changed my ringtone. Small, meaningless gestures that, together, felt like liberation. Work became my anchor again. I threw myself into it, not to forget, but to rebuild structure. I'd sit at my desk with my laptop open, typing with the kind of focus that used to belong to survival. My coworkers noticed, but no one asked. They saw the tired circles under my eyes and the steady way I smiled, and they understood. Pain, when worn long enough, becomes quiet competence. One evening, I stayed late at the office. Everyone had gone home, leaving only the soft hum of computers and the faint smell of burnt coffee. I stood by the window, watching the reflection of the city lights ripple across the glass. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel fooled. I felt awake. It hit me then. Taking control wasn't about revenge, or proving anything, or crafting the perfect version of moving on. It was about the small, boring choices that rebuild you. Getting out of bed, answering your own texts, making dinner for one, and eating it without bitterness, not needing an audience. When I left the office, The air outside was cold and sharp, the sky tinted violet. I walked home slowly, passing by the same cafe where we'd first met. The lights inside were warm, the sound of laughter spilling into the street. I looked through the window for a second, not in nostalgia but curiosity. The table where we'd sat was empty. I smiled at that, not because it meant anything, but because it didn't. By the time I got home, my body felt lighter. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, a random notification, not him, and I ignored it. I didn't need to check anymore. The quiet was mine now. Taking control didn't mean rebuilding who I used to be. It meant meeting the version of myself that had survived him, steadier, colder in some ways, but undeniably stronger. And somewhere between deleting those playlists and closing that door, I realized something I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't waiting to be understood. I was finally learning to understand myself. It took him exactly 12 days to reach out again. I knew it would happen. Men like Mark can't stand silence. They live on reaction, on the echo of their own words bouncing back at them. The text came in the middle of a quiet afternoon while I was working. Just one sentence. Can we talk? No apology, no context, just the same lazy confidence that used to make me stop everything and listen. I didn't answer, not because I was angry, but because I didn't owe him my curiosity anymore. I stared at the message for a few seconds, the small gray bubble waiting patiently for a response that would never come. Then I put my phone face down and went back to typing. That small act, choosing work over chaos, felt like power. But power doesn't always stay quiet. The next morning he called, twice, then 3 times. When I didn't pick up, he left a voicemail. His voice trembled in a way I'd never heard before. Not broken, not repentant, just confused, like a magician whose trick had finally stopped working. I know you hate me, he said. I just need to see you to explain. Explain. That word again, the eternal refuge of men who mistake confession for change. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. That evening he showed up. I knew he would. The knock on the door came just after 9. Soft, cautious, the sound of guilt pretending to be humility. I opened it because I wanted to look him in the eye one last time. Not for closure. Closure had already happened, but to make sure he saw that he no longer had access to me. He looked smaller, tired. His shirt was wrinkled, hair unkempt, eyes bloodshot in that way that only self-pity can cause. You look good, he said quietly. Better than I expected. That's because you didn't expect me to survive you, I said. He flinched, the line landing harder than I'd intended. Can we just talk? About what? I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. The way you recycled your feelings like drafts? The lies? The way you turned love into a group project? He winced. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. My tone stayed calm, almost gentle. You told me I was the only one who understood you. You told them the same thing. That's not love, Mark. That's marketing. He looked away, running a hand through his hair, the silence between us thick with all the excuses he'd used up. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said eventually. I was just lost. Lost people don't build maps of other hearts to get around, I said. They ask for directions. You didn't want help. You wanted worship. His jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. That was new, maybe even progress, though it wasn't my job to notice. He took a breath, shoulders sagging. I just thought, maybe, we could start over. I almost laughed, not cruelly, just with disbelief. Start over? You can't restart something that was never real. The words hung between us like smoke. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the floor. You're not even angry, he said quietly. I was, I replied, but anger's a kind of tether. You don't deserve to be tied to me anymore. He nodded slowly, his expression a mixture of resignation and something that almost looked like grief. Maybe he finally understood that the thing he'd lost wasn't me. It was the control he had over the version of me that needed him. Take care of yourself, I said, stepping back inside. My voice softened, not out of affection, but finality. And next time you tell someone they're the only one who understands you, try meaning it. He opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to reach for one last scrap of control. But I was already closing the door. The latch clicked. Clean, firm, final. I stood there for a moment, my hand still on the handle, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. The air on my side of the door felt lighter, untouched. I exhaled, long and slow, realizing that goodbye isn't always about words. Sometimes it's just about staying still when the past knocks. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood there, steady in the quiet. He had walked out, and for the first time, he wasn't taking any part of me with him. I turned off the lights, crawled into bed, and let the city hum outside my window. The world felt vast again, unclaimed. And as I drifted toward sleep, I realized something simple and solid. The story didn't end when I left him. It ended when I stopped needing him to know why. Time didn't heal anything dramatic. It just passed, quietly, relentlessly, like waves smoothing out a shoreline. The first few weeks after the goodbye were a study in silence. My phone no longer buzzed with his words. My nights no longer bent around, waiting for him to come home. The emptiness he left behind wasn't painful. It was spacious. I could finally hear myself think again. I moved into a smaller apartment, one with big windows and creaky floors that sang when I walked. The first night there, I slept on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by boxes and half-assembled furniture. The city lights painted soft gold stripes across the walls, and I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the strangeness of being completely alone. It didn't scare me. It felt like standing at the edge of something clean. I started building a life again, piece by piece, morning coffee in my favorite chipped mug, music playing low while I got ready for work, long showers where no one knocked on the door. My body began to loosen, my shoulders slowly dropping from the tense position they'd learned to hold. It's remarkable how much space you regain when you no longer have to shrink yourself for someone else's comfort. Some mornings, I'd take the long route to work just to feel the city moving around me, strangers brushing past, shopkeepers unlocking doors, the hum of conversation spilling from cafes. I'd catch my reflection in a window sometimes and hardly recognize her, not because I looked different, but because I finally looked like someone at peace with her own company. Mark's name still lived in my phone, somewhere deep in the contact list. I never deleted it, but I also never scrolled that far down. It didn't need to be erased, it just needed to stop mattering. That was the real freedom, not in forgetting, but in remembering without the ache. There were moments when loneliness showed up uninvited, quiet evenings when the city outside felt too big, too fast. But even those moments felt lighter than the kind of loneliness I'd carried inside the relationship. At least this version was honest. At least now, the silence was mine. One evening I came home to find a small box sitting on my doorstep. No note, no return label, just a plain cardboard box. Inside were the things I'd left behind. A scarf, a photo frame, one of my old notebooks. I lifted the scarf to my face. It smelled faintly like dust and the memory of him, which is to say, nothing real. I put the box down, closed the door behind me, and didn't cry. I just exhaled. He had returned what was mine, and in doing so, he'd confirmed what I already knew. There was nothing left between us worth keeping. I poured myself a glass of wine, turned on some music, and sat on the floor, surrounded by the quiet hum of my new life. The window was open, the wind moving softly through the curtains. Somewhere outside, a woman laughed, her voice cutting through the evening air. It made me smile, not because it reminded me of anything, but because it didn't. Healing didn't arrive like a sunrise. It came in fragments. Steady breathing during a panic that never came, full nights of sleep, laughter that sounded unguarded. Slowly, I stopped measuring time by when he left, and started measuring it by what I'd done since. I realized one afternoon, while making tea, that I hadn't thought about him in days. The thought startled me, not because I missed him, but because it proved I no longer needed to. That's what recovery really is. when remembering someone doesn't pull you backward anymore. It just passes through you like light through clean glass. And in that stillness, something unexpected happened. I started to like myself again, not the version of me who believed every kind word, not the woman who built her worth around being understanding, but the one who survived both, the one who walked away, not because she stopped caring, but because she finally cared enough about herself. That night, I stood by the open window, the city humming below, and whispered, "Thank you," not to him, to the version of me who'd chosen to leave. Because she'd done the hardest part. She'd decided that peace was worth more than promises. It's strange how quiet life becomes once you stop chasing noise that only ever hurt you. Weeks turned into months, and somewhere along the way, the ache I used to call love just disappeared. Not suddenly, it dissolved like sugar in hot water, leaving behind only a faint trace of sweetness and the memory of what used to be bitter. My new apartment no longer smelled like cardboard or new paint. It smelled like me: coffee in the morning, vanilla lotion, clean laundry. Little human details that used to get lost when my world revolved around someone else's moods. The walls were still half bare, but they didn't bother me. I was in no rush to fill the silence. I'd spent too long listening to someone talk circles around the truth. Quiet, I realized, is sacred when it's yours. Sometimes, I'd walk through the city on weekends, stopping at the same spots we used to go: the park bench under the sycamore tree, the cafe on 9th, where he'd always order for both of us. They looked exactly the same, but they didn't feel like mine anymore, and that was okay. I didn't need to reclaim everything he'd touched. Some places can stay in the past. They're just coordinates in an old life, not anchors. Every now and then, I'd get a message from an unknown number, short, familiar phrases: "Hope you're doing okay. Thinking about you." I never replied. The ghost of him had become predictable, almost boring. I'd read the first few words, smile faintly at the irony, and swipe them away. He used to need my attention like oxygen. Now he was gasping in a vacuum of his own making. I filled my life with smaller, quieter things: a pottery class on Thursdays, long calls with my sister, books that took too long to finish. I learned how to cook, for one, without making it feel like a punishment. I bought flowers for myself every Sunday, not because anyone was watching, but because the apartment looked better when something was alive in it. One evening, while scrolling through my emails, I stumbled across one of his old messages. I almost deleted it on sight, but something made me open it. It was from a year ago, a long, poetic paragraph about how no one had ever understood him the way I did. Reading it now, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel pity. I just felt distance. His words, once intoxicating, now sounded like static. I closed the email and smiled, realizing the obvious: understanding someone isn't the same as knowing them. I had understood him perfectly. That was the problem. Healing didn't turn me into someone harder. It made me quieter, more intentional. I no longer rushed to explain myself to people who had already decided not to listen. I stopped mistaking attention for affection, and I stopped romanticizing being the only one. No one worth keeping should make you prove your singularity just to earn respect. The next time someone tells me I'm the only one who truly understands them, I won't feel flattered. I'll feel cautious. Because real love doesn't isolate. It expands. It makes room. It's honest enough to be unique without being performative. Now, when I wake up, I don't reach for my phone. I stretch, breathe, open the window, and let the morning air in. The city hums, cars pass, someone downstairs is playing a song too loud. It's messy and human and alive, and I'm part of it again. Not as someone's mirror, not as someone's muse, just me. I think about the girl I used to be, the one sitting on the couch, laptop glowing, heart cracking quietly. I don't judge her anymore. She loved as best she could with the tools she had. She just didn't know yet that loving someone shouldn't mean losing the sound of your own voice. So this is what I've learned. Sometimes the greatest act of understanding is walking away. Because peace doesn't always come from being the person who gets someone. Sometimes it comes from finally getting yourself. Has this ever happened to you? Share your story in the comments.